Please don't go.
I don't know if I can stay.
A wagon wheel cracked against a rock, and Eleanor Whitfield jumped down before it could finish braking, landing hard in the mud, with her trunk still strapped to the back. She did not scream. She did not cry. She pulled a knife from her boot, cut the strap herself, and dragged the trunk the rest of the way into town alone. She had told her mother, her sister, and the preacher back in Boston the same thing 3 times before she left. She would never marry anyone, not for love, not for money, not for land. And yet here she was, standing in front of a rancher named Caleb Hayes, who was looking at her like he had just found water in a desert. What happened between them over the next 2 months would change everything she believed about herself. And by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why. This is the true shape of a story that has been quietly passed down through ranch families for generations, set in the harsh and beautiful territory of 1884, in a stretch of land that would one day become part of the state of Wyoming. Eleanor Whitfield was 26 years old when she stepped off that wagon, which by the standards of her time made her practically an old maid. Back in Boston, women her age were already raising their 2nd or 3rd child. But Eleanor had buried something most people never speak of, a fiancé who died of fever 2 days before their wedding. After that, she decided love was a door she would never open again. So when her uncle wrote to her, offering free passage west and a teaching position in a small ranching town, she said yes. Not because she wanted adventure, because she wanted to disappear. But here is the thing nobody tells you about the frontier. It doesn't let you disappear. It strips you down to exactly who you are, and then it dares you to survive that way. Caleb Hayes was 31 years old, built like a man who had spent every day of his life doing something physical and carrying a silence that made most people in town nervous. He had buried a wife 2 winters before. Some said it was the cold that took her. Others whispered something darker, something about a difficult birth that ended badly for both mother and child. Caleb never spoke of it, not once, not to anyone. He simply worked. From before sunrise until the stars were out, he worked his cattle ranch like a man trying to outrun a ghost. And here is your first open loop. Why did Caleb truly stop speaking after his wife died? It was not grief alone. There was a promise involved, a promise he made and broke. And we will return to that promise before this story ends. The day Eleanor arrived in town, the schoolhouse she was meant to teach in had partially collapsed under heavy snowfall the winter before. The town council, desperate and embarrassed, asked if anyone had room to board the new schoolteacher until repairs were finished. Caleb Hayes, against every instinct he had, raised his hand. Nobody expected it. Caleb had not let a single soul step onto his property since his wife passed. But there he was, offering his guest room to a stranger from Boston, with mud still on her boots and fire in her eyes. When Eleanor found out the arrangement, she refused immediately. "I will sleep in the church before I sleep under a bachelor's roof," she told the town councilwoman flatly. "I did not come west to ruin my reputation in the first week." But fate, as it often does on the frontier, did not ask for her permission. A storm rolled in that night, the kind that buries roads and turns rivers into traps. The church had no proper stove. The only warm, dry, safe place left in town was Caleb Hayes' ranch house. She arrived soaked and furious, refusing his offered blanket, refusing his offered chair by the fire, refusing. And Caleb did something that surprised her more than anything else could have. He didn't argue. He simply set the blanket on the chair, said goodnight, and walked away. That single act of restraint confused Eleanor more than any argument could have. She had expected pressure. She had expected the same tired performance every man back east had given her. the practiced charm, the empty compliments. Instead, she got silence and respect. But here is the thing about silence on the frontier. It can be just as dangerous as words, because it gives you room to wonder. Over the next several days, while the storm kept the roads buried, Eleanor began to notice things about Caleb that did not fit the cold reputation the town had given him. She watched him rise before dawn to break ice off the water troughs so his cattle could drink. She watched him patch a hole in the barn roof with his bare hands in freezing wind, never once complaining. She watched him feed an injured calf from a bottle in the middle of the night because he refused to let it die. And then there is the question that should haunt you. A man capable of that much tenderness toward an animal. What happened to make him stop showing it to people? One evening, while the wind howled outside, Eleanor found a small wooden box on the mantel that Caleb had clearly tried to hide behind a stack of old newspapers. Curiosity, as it often does, got the better of caution. Inside, she found a single faded photograph of a woman and a tiny, unfinished baby's bonnet, the stitching abandoned halfway through. She did not need anyone to explain what she was looking at. When Caleb walked in and saw her holding it, his face did something she had never seen from him before. It was not anger. It was something closer to a wound being reopened. "Put it back," he said quietly. "Please." She did. But the moment changed something between them. They were no longer just two strangers sharing a roof out of necessity. They were two people who had both buried someone they loved, and who both knew exactly what that kind of silence felt like from the inside. That night, for the first time, they actually talked. Not about the weather, not about the cattle, not about the schoolhouse repairs, about loss, about the unfairness of surviving something that should have killed you too, about the strange, guilty relief that sometimes comes after grief, and how nobody warns you that relief can feel like its own kind of betrayal. But here is where their story takes a turn nobody in town saw coming. As the weeks passed and the schoolhouse repairs dragged on, the two of them built something neither of them was looking for. Eleanor began teaching not just the town's children, but Caleb himself, who had never properly learned to read past a basic level, something he had hidden out of pride his entire adult life. In return, Caleb taught her how to ride properly, how to read the sky before a storm, how to survive a land that did not care whether you were ready for it or not. And somewhere in those long evenings of trading skills, neither of them admitted they wanted to share. Something shifted. Eleanor caught herself laughing at his dry jokes. Caleb caught himself watching the door each evening, waiting for her to come back from the schoolhouse. Now, here is something you should know if you've never lived through a frontier winter. Isolation does strange and powerful things to two people sharing close quarters. It strips away the performance of courtship that exists in cities, the calculated compliments, the careful distance. Out there, you see a person exactly as they are, exhausted, frightened, stubborn, kind. And somehow, that rawness creates a bond stronger than anything candlelight and pretty words could manufacture. But Eleanor fought it. Hard. She reminded herself daily of the vow she made after her fiancé died. She told herself that love was a door closed permanently, bricked over, finished. Then one afternoon in early spring, everything came to a head. A neighboring rancher, a wealthy and aggressive man named Thomas Pruitt, had been trying to buy out Caleb's land for over a year, mostly because Caleb's property sat directly on the only reliable water source for miles. When Caleb refused again, Pruitt did something far more dangerous than negotiate. He spread a rumor through town that Eleanor and Caleb were living together unmarried in scandal, hoping public shame would force Caleb to either marry quickly under pressure or leave town entirely, weakening his claim to the land. The rumor spread fast, the way rumors always do in small towns. Suddenly, Eleanor's job, her reputation, her entire fresh start out west, was in danger because of something she never even did. She was furious, not at Caleb, at the unfairness of it, at a world where a woman's name could be ruined by a man's jealousy over land. That evening, Caleb found her packing her trunk, ready to leave town entirely, rather than face the gossip. And here is the moment everything changes. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, and said something he had never said to another living soul since his wife died. "I told myself I'd never let anyone close again," he said. "Told myself it wasn't fair to ask someone to live with a man who buries himself in work to keep from feeling anything. But you didn't ask to be let in. You just were. And I don't know how to make that rumor disappear, Eleanor. But I know I don't want you to leave because of it." Eleanor stopped packing. "I'll never marry anyone," she said, her voice shaking, more out of habit than belief at this point. "I made that promise to myself a long time ago." And this is where Caleb said the words that the entire town would later remember for years. The words that gave this story its place in local memory. He stepped closer, voice low and steady. "Then let me change your mind, not because of some rumor, not because of land or pride. Because I think you stopped believing love could be safe, and I think I stopped believing I deserved it. Maybe we're both wrong." Silence stretched between them, the kind of silence that holds an entire decision inside it. Eleanor did not answer with words. She answered by setting down the dress she was folding, walking across the room, and doing something she had sworn she would never do again. She let herself be held by someone she was terrified to lose. The wedding that followed a few weeks later was small, plain, and exactly what both of them wanted. No grand church, no fine silk gown shipped from the east. Just close neighbors, a borrowed fiddle, and a quiet ceremony held right there on Caleb's land, beside the water that Thomas Pruitt had wanted so badly. Speaking of which, if you were wondering what happened to Pruitt after his scheme failed so spectacularly, stick around, because the rest of this story does not let him off easy. Word of the scandal and the marriage that followed it eventually reached the territorial newspapers, who loved nothing more than a tale of frontier romance triumphing over greed. Pruitt's reputation suffered far more than Caleb's ever had, and within 2 years, he sold his ranch and left the territory entirely, unable to find anyone willing to do business with a man known for trying to destroy a woman's reputation out of spite. As for Eleanor and Caleb, their life together was never easy. The frontier rarely allowed for easy. There were droughts that threatened the herd, winters that tested every ounce of strength they had, and the slow, careful work of two wounded people learning to trust, again after loss, had taught them not to. But they built something real, something earned rather than given, brick by brick, season by season. The wooden box with the photograph and the unfinished bonnet was never hidden away again. Eleanor finished the stitching on that tiny bonnet herself, years later, for their own first child, as a quiet way of honoring the woman who came before her rather than erasing her. If there is one thing this story leaves behind, it is this: the people who say they will never love again are often the ones who loved the hardest the first time. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is not avoid being hurt again, but choose, deliberately, to risk it anyway. We'd love to know what you think this story teaches about second chances. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this one mean something to you, this is exactly the kind of frontier history brought to life that we build this channel around. So consider joining us here if you haven't already, because we've got many more journeys west still waiting to be told. This video is an artistic recreation brought to life through artificial intelligence, inspired by real frontier customs and traditions. For precise historical accuracy, please consult official historical sources.